Just as we thought the FTX saga could not get any crazier, FTX's co-founder Gary Wang and the CEO of Alameda Research, Caroline Ellison, both pled guilty to federal charges and confirmed that they are cooperating with prosecutors today. This comes just hours after SBF was extradited from the Bahamas to face trial in the US. Let's go through exactly what is going down with the SBF saga right now, because we've had many major updates. So FTX co-founder Gary Wang and former Alameda Research co-CEO Caroline Ellison both pleaded guilty to federal charges in the Southern District of New York, US, Attorney Damian Williams said in a message on Wednesday. Simultaneously, both the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and the Security and Exchange Commission released civil complaints against them. The SEC alleged that they were involved in a multi-year scheme to defraud equity investors in FTX and the crypto trading platform co-founded by SBF and Wang. The CFTC expanded the complaint charges, saying that Ellison with fraud and material misrepresentations in connection with the sale of digital asset commodities in interstate commerce, and charges Wang with fraud in connection with the sale of digital asset commodities in interstate commerce. This is what Caroline Ellison, the former CEO of Alameda Research, is facing. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud on FTX customers, wire fraud on FTX customers, conspiracy to commit wire fraud on Alameda lenders, wire fraud on Alameda lenders, conspiracy to commit commodities fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. So she has been slapped with a whole lot of charges, which actually carry a maximum sentence of 110 years in prison. That is obviously both for her involvement with FTX and Alameda Research, as well as they are charging her with price manipulation. Now, if we move over to look at Gary Wang's charges, he was the co-founder of FTX and also had a role as the CTO at FTX. He pled guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud on FTX customers, conspiracy to commit commodities fraud, and securities fraud. This carries a maximum penalty of around 50 years in prison. So Caroline, having ties to Alameda Research as well as FTX, is obviously facing 60 years more in prison than Gary Wang, but Gary is still facing a massive 50 years in prison. And it's just crazy timing that all of this was announced whilst SBF was literally on the plane, on the way from the Bahamas to the US. Now, I want to go and play a video now from the Southern District of New York's attorney so you guys can see exactly what they said about the current situation, as it will give us a lot of clarity as to the future proceedings of this case. Let's get into this video.
Last week, we announced charges against Sam Bankman-Fried for a sweeping fraud scheme that contributed to FTX's collapse, and for a campaign finance scheme that sought to influence public policy in Washington. As I said last week, this investigation is very much ongoing and it's moving very quickly. I also said that last week's announcement would not be our last. And let me be clear once again, neither is today's. I want to make two announcements. First, I'm announcing that the Southern District of New York has filed charges against Caroline Ellison, the former CEO of Alameda Research, and Gary Wang, a co-founder of FTX, in connection with their roles in the frauds that contributed to FTX's collapse. Both Ms. Ellison and Mr. Wang have pled guilty to those charges, and they are both cooperating with the Southern District of New York. Let me reiterate a call that I made last week. If you participated in misconduct at FTX or Alameda, now is the time to get ahead of it. We are moving quickly, and our patience is not eternal. Second, I'm announcing that Samuel Bankman-Fried is now in FBI custody and is on his way back to the United States. He will be transported directly to the Southern District of New York, and he will appear in court before a judge in this district as soon as possible. Many individuals in the Bahamas and in the United States contributed to the swiftness of the defendant's return, and I want to thank the Bahamas for its outstanding assistance and excellent coordination with us. I also want to thank our partners at the United States Embassy in the Bahamas and the Justice Department's Office of International Affairs. And finally, I want to thank the FBI for moving mountains to get this done. This was a true team effort. Finally, I want to thank the career prosecutors from my office who are handling this case. We continue to work around the clock, and we are far from done. Thank you.
Wow. So a lot of stuff was said in that. Just to break down some of the key points, I think one of the major key points from that announcement is that Gary Wang and Caroline Ellison are actually cooperating with the Southern District of New York. So they are cooperating in this case, which is actually a case against primarily SBF, as he was kind of the head of FTX and the co-founder of FTX. So technically, anything that Gary and Caroline do to provide evidence or information against SBF is, I guess, directly leading to SBF's eventual arrest. So I do think that it's interesting that the timing of this happened just as SBF was being extradited, because he's literally on the plane and they're announcing at the exact same time that he's on the plane mid-air that Gary Wang and Caroline are actually working with the Southern District of New York. So clearly that is strategic timing. And it makes me ask the question, maybe if Sam Bankman-Fried had known about this earlier, then he may have fought extradition and he wouldn't have been pushing as hard for extradition from the Bahamas to the US. So it's a very, very interesting turn of events. And this turn of events happened just hours after SBF was officially granted his extradition from the Bahamas to the US. So this was a process that took multiple days. It was delayed multiple days after some really weird court appearances from Sam. The first being a court appearance where the judge really was just confused and ended up sending him back to Fox Hill in the Bahamas. Then he filed his extradition intent the next day. Well, his lawyer went and filed on his behalf. And then the day after, which was this morning, Sam officially got extradited with a scheduled flight departure time of 6 p.m. 7 p.m., that is when the news actually did break that Caroline and Gary had been charged. So they are facing massive charges as well, but also clearly cooperating with authorities here. Now, all this came after the US sent a diplomatic note after filing criminal charges for SBF to the Bahamas to actually get them to process his extradition. So all this happens after the US filed criminal charges and they wanted the Bahamas to proceed with his extradition. That's one of the reasons why we end up in this situation of him being extradited. Wasn't just the government, though, that was pressing charges here. The US Commodity Futures Trading Commission also filed charges against Caroline Ellison and Gary Wang as well. This is in their involvement of price manipulation related to what is presumably the FTX token. So they also filed fraud charges against them. And Mario makes an interesting comment. He says, SBF will land in the US fucked. And that's, I think, exactly what happened. The second this guy touches down, he's going to get this news that that they've actually kind of, maybe not conspired, but at least, are working with authorities against SBF. Chet Long says he actually just landed in the US at Westchester County Airport in New York, and he is under FBI and US Marshal custody. Now he gets to learn that his former lover Caroline and his former friend Wang have almost certainly betrayed him for less time behind bars themselves. And when we actually look at the amount of time that Caroline Ellison and Gary Wang are facing, I mean, it's significant. Caroline facing 110 years, Gary facing 50 years. It's unlikely that they would be working with the Southern District of New York if they didn't think that they could get their time in prison down. Like, clearly there's an agenda here. That Caroline and Gary will almost undoubtedly be able to get their sentence significantly reduced from their maximum sentences, which are obviously massive, up to 110 years. Caroline could end up doing, let's say, 5 to 10 years if she provides evidence or information that can lead to the prosecution of Sam Bankman-Fried. So it's been a pretty crazy day in the SBF saga, and lots of updates. Now, one of the major things, or one of the major reasons why people were saying that Sam actually wanted to be extradited from the Bahamas to the US originally was because of the possibility of him receiving bail. Now, obviously, Sam's facing a lot of charges himself. Wire fraud conspiracy, securities fraud, money laundering. This could see him land in jail for between 80 to 100 years as well. But if we kind of look at the precedent set by other fraudsters, for example, Bernie Madoff, a famous fraudster, he was released on, released for bail, so not officially released, on a $10 million personal recognizance bond. And also he was allowed to conduct home or house arrest. So he was allowed to essentially have an ankle monitor on and kind of go through the trial period whilst being at home, because the thing with SBF is, and similar to other major fraud cases, is this is going to be an extremely drawn out process, potentially like many, many years, because there's just so much for the government to actually dig through here. There's forensics. There's, internal data. They're going to have to unencrypt chats. They need to get multiple counterparties' takes on like lending and borrowing, and just auditing the books, considering they were just not in good shape, would be an absolute nightmare. So until we get full resolutions on everything, and that will come out in trial, it's going to be a long, long time. So clearly SBF, one of the reasons why he may have wanted to go from the Bahamas to the US is potentially to get bail, because he wasn't granted bail in the Bahamas. So if we look at Madoff as maybe a precedent for what SBF could get, maybe he will be applicable for house arrest. Now, there's two considerations the federal bail law has to take into account here. One is SBF being a flight risk. Clearly, he's a high-risk target, considering he's not only one of the biggest fraudsters of all time, but also has access, presumably, to hidden funds that could allow him to disappear. So he is a flight risk. And two, he could be considered a danger to the public. I don't think he's a danger to the public in the same way a sex offender or a mass murderer is a danger to the public, but SBF in some way, shape, or form could be considered a danger to the public as well, due to the mass fraud that he's committed. So being a huge flight risk, I think, is probably the major component out of these two considerations, and that probably results in obviously him not getting free bail, but getting more of like a home confinement, house arrest type arrangement like Madoff. So this is something to watch out for, and potentially explains one of the major reasons why he was pushing for extradition, because he could potentially get off on bail. Although, if we look at Madoff as precedent, then it'll be a huge a dollar figure, probably in the $5 to $10 million plus dollar figure. So it's a lot of money. But yeah, a lot of crazy news today, obviously, off the back of his extradition. I just want to pivot slightly now that I've covered all the SBF news to the charts, just to give you guys a quick update. I did do a show this morning, which updated you guys on my levels. But for those who didn't see the show, I wanted to run through some of my TA and what I'm seeing in the market right now. So clearly, post CPI and FOMC, where the Fed came out slightly more hawkish than expectation, Bitcoin is now range bound. So we can see we're stuck between this 16.3 level and this 17.3 level. And today, the price action has been fairly stagnant. So for me, until there's a major break of either the upside at this level here or the downside at this level here, I'm not expecting any huge movements in the Bitcoin price. I think for the time being, we are definitely range bound. Now, how can you actually trade the range? Well, in my opinion, there's two different trades. There's rent money trades, which are the trades you make for big money, which are potentially those massive breakouts to either side. This would correspond with a breakout of this yellow line to the upside, or a breakdown of this green line to the downside. And then there's beer money trades. So smaller trades for lesser dollar amounts, but to keep the dollars ticking along. And that would be playing the range in and of itself, which is a 6% range, which means if we get rejected off the yellow, playing the short game, which would mean shorting, expecting a pullback down into the range, or playing the bounce game, which would be longing on the green support here. So those are the smaller trades I take until there's a confirmed breakout, and then obviously we can trade the breakout either side. Right now, because Ethereum is showing weakness in terms of the ETH BTC chart, maybe not on the hourly, but definitely on the 4 hourly overall, we saw a slight pump, but overall the trend has been down for quite some time. If we extend this trend line down, we can see that it is still quite away from this trend. And in my opinion, unless it's probably likely to get rejected, considering it has made lower highs continuously for the last month or so, that, in my opinion, gives me a good signal that when I want to short, I'll short Ethereum. And when I want to long, I'll long Bitcoin. Because if ETH dominance is dropping, that means that ETH is less favored in the market. And that makes it a more ideal short. And when Bitcoin is showing a bit of strength, then that means that is a more ideal long target and a more ideal and a less ideal short target. So to summarize, if I'm taking a long trade, so let's say we bounce off the bottom of this range and I want to play the trade here, I'd obviously set my stop below the previous wick. Similar thing for a bounce on the top, I'd set my stop above the next wick. These are trades that you can take inside the range. The long trade, I'm going to take on Bitcoin because Bitcoin has the dominance. To the downside, so if it comes here and we want to short, then I'll be shorting Ethereum instead from its corresponding level at, I'll get the Ethereum chart up, from its corresponding level at 1300 and its bottom level in the reverse situation of 1171. So long Bitcoin, short ETH, those are the levels. I'm kind of playing that range. I will be opening my trades on Apex because it's a decentralized exchange. Obviously, there are benefits to trading on an exchange that isn't centralized because you get to keep custody of your own assets. And they're also doing quite a nice promotion at the moment where they're giving away $190,000 worth of rewards every single week for trading. So basically, the more you trade, the more you make. So right now, there's just like huge incentives to actually trade on Apex. They're partners with BYBIT. They're a very good exchange, and they're an order book exchange. So that they have fairly deep liquidity, and order books are good because that's where you get price discovery, right? So I do like Apex as an exchange. So if you want to trade, there's a link in the description to trade on Apex. Just to update you guys as well, I know the ones that watched the show earlier in the day, it's going to feel like I'm repeating myself, but there was huge news, so I had to break the FTX story. My nested portfolio is my longer term portfolio for the guys that are less trading inclined and want to invest long term. This is the portfolios that I DCA into long term. I edit them every single week. I keep up to date and I add things that I like and I get rid of things that I don't necessarily like. And over the next 6 months, we're going to tweak this to be what, in my opinion, is like the perfect long-term DCA portfolio. So get involved with that. Link in the description if you want to DCA into anything. But let me know in the comments what you think of this FTX situation. It's kind of crazy. Caroline and Gary going behind SBF's back here. What do you think is going to happen? Are they going to get a reduced sentence? Will Caroline do anywhere close to 110 years? And who's next? Because presumably there's going to be a few more FTX members. The prosecutor said himself, or the attorney general said that there were going to be many members of FTX that are in the firing line here. And he said that if you're in FTX and you haven't spoke out, well, speak out now because we're moving quickly on this. So who potentially is next? Are we going to see a Dan, is it Dan Freeberg or a Sam Trabucco? I'm just kind of naming names, but those kind of guys, they may be under a bit of pressure now to talk as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out over the coming days, weeks, and months, because there's kind of a spectrum of how this is going to play out from the next participants that are going to be potentially charged to the trial, and then the final verdict of the trial, which could be a multi-year process, really, if we break it down to what it's worth. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the show. I will see you in tomorrow's show. And until then, have a lovely day. Peace out.